Well, it's still Inauguration Day, and we're still talking education. Now, we have been talking about low income or, private schools. I'm still trying to piece that in my head, but then I have been educated on what that means. But we're moving a notch higher to talk about tertiary education, which is very important. And we all know that if you have gone through a federal university, then you must have experienced 1 or 2 strikes. Before we get to the strike part, I have in the studio joining us Chineye Mba Uzuku. He is joining us with Modupe Adefeso Olateju, who had been here with us. Thank you very much, gentlemen and lady, for being here. So, like I introduced, let's talk about tertiary education. We know, I remember one of the reasons why I hated being a lawyer, because I'm from a family of so many lawyers, was that every single time I took JAM, I couldn't make it. And I was just trying to understand why. But there were so many other people who wanted to do professional courses and not think about other professions, because you wanted to either be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. It was just those 3 things. So if you were a med lab scientist or anything else, you're never going to make money in life. But let's talk about the education that is being offered in our institutions. It's just a few years ago we started having private universities in Nigeria. The average person went to Modupe, UI, etc., etc. Where did we get it wrong so much so that these new universities, which we call, in quotes, glorified secondary schools, have come to stay? I'll start with you.
Okay, so it's difficult to answer the question without challenging what you've just said.
Of course, feel free, please.
All right, so we said we call them glorified secondary schools.
In quote.
I think that may be a harsh description, but I understand where it's coming from. And I'm not honestly really sure whether it is in the reverse that is the case. So, and you look at it from the perspective of numbers and output. So when you think about the NUC statistic says that there are approximately 1.7 million children, and total enrollment of all the universities, 165 of them, is about 1.7 million. Okay. Which is about 1% of our population. Of that 1% of our population, only 5.35% of them are in the private tertiary institutions. 5.35. So that means that the majority and an overwhelming majority are still in
public universities.
So the question would be, the question we might ask is, why are they so few in private institutions, and what's happening to the many in the public institutions? And then we start having a discussion about which one is a glorified secondary school or not. No. And then and the more you pile the numbers on, the more you start asking. In 2019 budget, right? Education, which is on the concurrent list, has about 47 billion, which is like number 4, number 5 in terms of the lowest allocation, yes. On capital expenditure. On the recurrent expenditure, which is where you have personnel, wages and costs and all that sort of stuff, education is at 462 billion, the second highest allocation of recurrent expenditure in the federal budget. So you contrast the two. You're spending 47 billion on capital expenditure, which is meant to develop and grow and expand capacity. You're spending 462 billion on recurrent expenditure, which means that, and of that 462 billion, about 370 billion is going to salaries. So government is over investing in an area where they have the least, because the only 35 universities. Federal government-owned universities, 35 of them. Of the 165 universities, there are only 35 federally owned universities. And they're spending 462 billion, or about 370 billion of it is going on wages and salaries. So when we look at it from an educational perspective, we're asking, so what are you getting for the money that you're paying? And then we can't answer the question.
Yeah, of course.
Again, because then we go deeper and we look again at admission rates. So what are the admission rates? Admission rates in Nigeria, a university, any of the federal universities like the older ones, will probably get about 35,000 applications a year, and they will admit 3,000. So JAMB, they'll admit 3,000 only. So again, it's back to the same question. If out of the 100 and the 1.6 million that take JAMB every year, less than 70%, about 70% of them are going to score below 200. Which is 50%. of the grades. And then we admit at what, 100, 110, 120?
Depends on, you know, the quota.
So all these numbers are basically pointing to the fact that there's a problem in the education system. And it's not with the private sector. It's education system as a whole, tertiary.
Yeah, but you know, people talking about the private sector, people would make the excuse that the public sector created the opening for the private sector to come on in. Although the average person, and I'll put myself in that, you know, box, might not be able to afford that opening which the private schools, you know, offer.
Correct.
Because, take for example, which is closest, Covenant University. I mean, I'm guessing how much you would have to pay compared to those of us who are in private public universities. But then again, even those who are in the public universities cannot afford to pay the fees.
So it's not a quality question. The university you mentioned, for instance, we charge 5 million naira for a degree. We charge 5 million naira for tuition in medicine. A public university would charge 50,000. You can't get 50,000 naira for tuition for the same course, what they call BMAS. They're doing exactly the same curriculum in both universities. One charges 5 million, the other one charges 50,000. It is clear, and it should be crystal clear to all of us, that you cannot get a qualitative education at the current tuition that is being paid in public schools. It's absolutely impossible. You can't buy the equipment that are required. You can't equip libraries. You don't get the best lecturers. You can't get the number of students into the classrooms. The infrastructure that's required to deliver teaching is just not there. So it's impossible at that tuition.
But because government, I'm sorry, I'm going to come to you. But because government is in charge of these schools, we're supposedly thinking that this is subsidized education. And that's why we're not going to private institutions, because government is in this business and they're making us think that it is subsidized. So of course, I can get a degree with 100,000 naira in the same course that somebody else is paying 5 million. I'm just saying.
You can subsidize
for the purpose of argument.
No, we're subsidizing mediocrity.
Okay.
Right? And that's a double whammy, because you're paying a subsidy and you're producing mediocrity. And it's not because the children are not intelligent. And it's not because some of the lecturers don't have the capacity. It's because the entire system that we've built and the model that we're running on cannot function in the 21st century to deliver the kind of education that you want. It just is impossible. The carrying capacity of our universities and our admission system has been frozen for 30 years. But our population has increased to the level that
Of course.
So what do you do?
So the question goes to you. Where do we start to treat the disease? Because like he pointed out, 30 years, it's been frozen in time. But then we've not stopped giving birth to babies, and the youngsters are still not, they're not stunted in growth. They're growing up, they want to go to universities and they want to come out and do stuff. So where do we start to treat the rot in the system?
I think a couple of things I want to contribute. I think the first is, I'm not certain that there's anything inherently wrong in private provision when it comes to tertiary level. Many of the schools that Nigerians desire to go to in America are private schools. Harvard, Yale, these are private schools. It's very uncommon, in fact, to find government provision at that level of quality, just to buttress what Chinenye was saying. And so the question is, how do we make quality education accessible to people? And there are many models around the world making financing available to young people, which they can then spread out over 30 years, 40 years. The real issue in Nigeria is when we interrogate that education to employment chain, that pathway is flawed, because education offers you a promise. And part of that promise is that you're going to have a sustainable livelihood. Especially tertiary education. But we all know the reality. In the organization where I worked, we advertised a vacancy, 12 vacancies, and we had 1,100 applications.
Oh dear.
And many organizations have similar.
Of course. I mean, Dangote advertised for drivers, and we saw what happened. PhD holders were all applying.
The economy has not grown enough and has not been diversified enough to be able to fully absorb the output of the tertiary education sector. I think that's a huge problem. I think that the second thing to say is tertiary education is fantastic, but there are also incredible opportunities for careers when you think about the technical and vocational space.
But you see, we don't beam the lights on these. It's just recently the Senate or the National Assembly passed some law allowing the HND to be on the same level with, because again, there's this stereotypes that, polytechnics and monotechs are, you have to go to a university. So we make certain colleges look better than the other. Maybe the problem is from us again.
I think a lot of it, interestingly, is a media thing.
Really?
I think a lot of it is the media, and I'm not referring just to television. I'm talking of, how we consume information generally. I think that there's a lot of work that should be done in the media. And when we think about, just cast your mind now to people that you know who are doing what 10 years ago you might refer to as unconventional careers. Think about the photographers. Think about event management people. Think about comedians.
Interior decorations.
Interior decorators.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these people have on their payroll people who went to university and who even have advanced degrees from university. So it's very important that we begin to the media can really help here to change that narrative around what does it mean to have a qualification from a technical college? What does it mean to have a qualification from vocational college? And if you really query what they do in the technical and vocational colleges, I think it's the NAPTEP have really created this incredible way by which you can move in and out. You can come in with a technical and vocational qualification into a tertiary institution, a university rather, into a university. You can move back again. So there are ways by which it can be done, but I think that one area that we're really suffering in is that media bit of it. We're not shining the light enough.
So we need to do more documentaries
I think we need
more exposés.
And role modeling. I think we need to spotlight the opportunities that are available. That way we have less of a press on the universities.
Okay, back to you, Chineye. Because we're trying to set an agenda here, because the state universities, the state tertiary institutions and federal, going forward, President Muhammad Buhari has 4 years, but we have as long as we have. Where do we start, especially here in Lagos, which is our place of primary assignment? Where do we start to change this perspective? And for those of you who are education experts, who are you supposed to talk to? Apart from talking to governments, are there like seminars, workshops, maybe TV programs that, just as she said, that could bring light to these, areas that we need to reawaken or grow or better?
Well, let me start from the last, and I think you're doing a great job. I mean, I'm not meaning to praise you, facetiously. I think it's very important that the major media organizations start to focus on education TV, and spend more time, allocate more opportunity for discussions like this to happen, and to have a lot more engagement with the communities that actually matter, the stakeholders actually matter, like the parents. So a simple discussion. A round table like this, where you have parents in a hall, almost like a town hall meeting, and you're asking them, okay, so what choices did you make? And you have the children there, and the children are talking about their own experience, could help convince people that there are other things for them to do, and then we can highlight role models. There are people who have been incredibly successful who don't have degrees in university, and that kind of like helps to ventilate the conversation and to expose people to opportunities and to think differently around the career progression for their children. I also feel that there may be a lot of work that has to be done by the regulatory agencies in terms of explaining what happens. So for instance, the way the JAM scores and ranks is more like a ranking system, because they look at quartiles than raw scores. People don't really understand that, and don't really understand why it is that you keep taking JAM and you never get admitted. And it's not really about your score per se, it's your score relative to other scores in that particular year. So from year to year, you could have done exceptionally well in terms of answering the questions in 1 year, but because there are a lot of you who did exceptionally well, you don't fall into the quartile that allows you to be admitted. So that's kind of like what happens. So people don't understand that. It doesn't take away from the fact that this issue of what do you call it, cutoff marks and all that. I mean, I remember I was in India 1 year when the results came out for admission into the Delhi University system, and the cutoff was 100%. In Nigeria, I mean, you have to score 100% to be in the first cutoff. right? And we come back to Nigeria and you're looking at continuously declining year after year. The averages are falling. But even worse is the fall off. So you have 1.6 million people taking an exam. You certify maybe 800,000 for admission. And at the end of the admission exercises, when the universities have finished the selections and the students have been able to pay the tuition and pass all the other criteria for admission, you end up with 500,000. So essentially you have 1.5 million, 1.2 million, 1.1 million people every year falling out of the system who do not go into university. And there is a limit to the carrying capacity of our universities. Like I said, they are stuffed to the brim as they are, and they can only accept 1.7 million total. So in any given year, you will not admit more than 250 to maybe 300 at stretch when you add all the other colleges of education, everything, 500,000. That's 500,000 people going into the university system. One province in China, Haodong, produces 450,000 graduates in business studies alone every year. Yeah. So competing globally and getting ourselves where we need to get to means that we need to do things that are exponential. And so far, when we listen to what people are saying, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, Lagos, not that it doesn't make any sense, maybe I should be nicer and just say that it doesn't address the issue.
It doesn't, add up.
It needs to address the issue because what we need is not just to fix the system, but we need to stop the bleeding today. And we need to grow exponentially. The two things have to happen simultaneously. Start solving the problems of today, which is what the schools like the low-fee paying schools are trying to solve, where children are out of school because they just can't afford to get into school.
So create other options.
Yes, but then you have to put an accelerator. And there is no other accelerator. There are two things. So when you think of things, you have to think of what catalyzes. You've got to think of what accelerates and what creates exponential growth. And the one thing that will do that, perhaps I suspect the only thing that will do that in its entirety is technology.
Okay.
So if you don't massively deploy technology, so think of it this way. We can put every single person who wants to learn in school today if we can give them access to online learning. So the only cost to you is a device and connectivity. And the lessons are there. You will have a lecturer who is teaching in places like, universities like MIT have what they call MIT Open Courseware. So they are aiming for 100% of every lecture delivered and every course taught in MIT to be available for free to anyone in the world.
Wow.
So that's MIT. So the big question is, why are universities not on an accelerated trajectory to being able to provide e-learning to as many people as want to go to school?
Well, we have too many problems to deal with.
Physically, well, think about it.
Yeah.
Let's go to the numbers. Numbers always tell you.
We don't have too much time.
So let me just quickly drop one number for you. So 40 million children need to be in school every day. If we take 40 people in a classroom, we need to have 1 million classrooms. I'm not talking about schools. I'm saying 1 million classrooms.
So we
will never build 1 million classrooms. So if you want these people to go to school, you must think of
technology.
Yeah, classrooms without walls. And so it's that type of exponential, that kind of out of the box thinking that creates that exponential opportunity. And then you now start driving all the other elements like finance and funding, that kind of thing into the picture. And then we can pick up. But if you don't do that, then I think we are kind of like I said, we will continue to subsidize mediocrity. And the children suffer for it because, in the education system, the only person who's held accountable is the student. The minister doesn't suffer, the commissioners don't suffer, the parents don't suffer, the regulators don't suffer, all the
lecturers
civil
get paid.
It's only one person, it's just the student.
Yeah, true thing. Thank you very much, Chinenye Uzoku, and of course, Modupe Adefeso Olateju. Thank you very much for speaking with us. Your names are very interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary Ann.
All right, we'll take a short break and bring you the news at the top of the hour. And right after that, the conversations continue. Stay with us.